Welcome to our discussion on the Apostles' Creed, its origins, dating, and the controversies it has stirred up over the centuries.
Absolutely. It's such a fascinating topic. The Creed has been central to Christian liturgy, but there's so much to unpack about where it came from and how it evolved, yes?
Right, exactly. At its core, the Apostles' Creed has been seen as a summary of the teachings of the apostles, even if not written by them directly. It basically emerged from early baptismal practices.
And these early baptismal confessions, they really set the stage, didn't they? It's like the foundational blueprint for the community's faith.
Yeah. It's like you have this blueprint handed down and it gets refined over time. Traditional sources like Tertullian and Hippolytus mention fragments of this baptismal confession.
Right, so even though it wasn't penned by the apostles themselves, its impact is pretty deep-rooted in early Christian practice.
Yep, definitely. And then, by the 4th century, the Creed had made its way into both Eastern and Western churches, although there were some small differences.
Those regional variations really show how the early church wasn't just a monolith, right? Every community had its own nuance while still holding on to a common tradition.
Exactly. It's like, imagine building a house where every room is decorated a bit differently, yet the house is still one.
That's a great analogy.
The core remains, but the details evolve.
Speaking of evolving, I'm really intrigued by the various dating theories you mentioned. Most scholars hold that the Creed reached a somewhat final form by the late 2nd or early 3rd century.
Right on. The mainstream view is built on patristic testimony. Church fathers such as Tertullian and Hippolytus all seem to support that timing. Plus, its integral role in baptismal rites hints at its early adoption.
So, what about those alternative theories? I've heard some scholars even argue for a form emerging in the very late 1st century. Isn't that so?
Yes, indeed. A few researchers push the idea that an embryonic version might date all the way back to the late 1st century, almost like an oral tradition that later got fixed in writing, though the textual evidence from that time is scarce.
Naturally, when we're dealing with millennia-old traditions, concrete evidence can be hard to come by. But then there are also theories suggesting later redactions, perhaps in the 4th century.
Precisely. Some suggest that while the core of the Creed is ancient, additional phrases and theological nuances were layered on as the early church grappled with major doctrinal issues, like the nature of Christ and the Holy Spirit.
That reminds me, isn't there a bit of a controversy about how the Creed expresses Christ's dual nature?
Absolutely. The way the Creed articulates that Christ is both fully divine and fully human has been a major point of debate, especially during the early ecumenical councils. Some see it as perfectly balanced. Others think it left room for ambiguity.
I get that. But wouldn't you say that the Creed, being a shorthand for faith, is designed to encapsulate rather than exhaustively explain?
That's a fair point, but some critics argue that by not delving deeply enough, it inadvertently leaves room for varying interpretations. For instance, the wording about the Holy Spirit has varied across manuscripts, which reflects different early understandings.
True, it's intriguing how those textual variations can tell us so much about regional theological debates.
Yep, exactly. And one aspect that's often discussed is its silence on Jewish law. Some scholars argue that this silence suggests an evolution towards a more distinct Christian identity, even hinting at anti-Jewish stances in its later formulations.
That's a provocative observation. That does raise some eyebrows. I mean, religious texts evolve with context, and the socio-political landscapes can heavily influence wording.
Exactly. It's similar to how recipes change over time depending on local ingredients, except here it's about doctrinal emphasis rather than spices.
I like that analogy. It's like adjusting flavor profiles for a unique taste.
Exactly. And then, aside from internal debates, the Creed also witnessed regional variations. For instance, the Eastern and Western recensions sometimes differ. Like in the Western tradition, there's an omission of "born of the Virgin Mary" in some segments, which really shows different theological priorities.
Yeah, these subtleties are fascinating. They reflect broader liturgical and cultural differences across Christianity.
For sure. And let's not forget the modern revisitations during the Reformation and even in current ecumenical dialogues There's been a push to either revise or restore the original wording.
Absolutely.
That shows that this creed is still very much a living legacy in a way.
It really is. And speaking of living, it's interesting how a centuries-old document can still spark such vibrant debate. Do you think these debates have any relevance to how we understand faith today?
I believe so. It's a reminder that our understanding of faith is like an ongoing conversation, a dialogue not only between believers but also between different times and cultures. The dynamic
definitely.
nature of these discussions shows that theology isn't static.
But some critics might say that continual revisions undermine its authority. What's your take on that?
That's a really interesting critique. I'd say that while constant changes can seem destabilizing, they also reflect a responsive approach to complex issues. Think of it as updating software to address bugs. While it may disrupt the status quo momentarily, it's ultimately done to adapt to a more secure and clear understanding.
Yeah, that analogy really resonates, indeed. And it seems like scholars use a wealth of sources, from patristic studies to textual criticism, to piece this puzzle together, right?
Exactly. Works by people like Jaroslav Pelikan and Philip Schaff, alongside modern research, underscore that the creed is as much about historical context as it is about doctrine.
Absolutely.
It's like digging through layers of history to find the core essence of early Christian belief.
And isn't that core essence itself something that has united many Christians over centuries, despite all these changes?
Yes, and that's really the beauty of the Apostles' Creed. It stands as a testament to both unity and diversity within the Christian tradition. No matter how its wording evolved, its primary purpose has been to bind a community together through shared beliefs.
It's a living document that testifies to a community's journey through faith, conflict, and ultimately unity.
Exactly. And it challenges each generation to reflect on what it really means to confess one's faith in a changing world.
Yep, well said. I love how we've connected passages from early testimony to ongoing modern debates. It underscores that theological tradition is as dynamic as our own understanding of life and faith.
Absolutely, and just like with many aspects of our shared history, it's a conversation that will continue for a long time to come. Thanks for this engaging chat.